tonight it's day 2 of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas after 11 days of bloody conflict that has killed over 240 people. Both sides right now claiming victory and warning that if the agreement is broken, the strikes will continue. We'll speak to 2 political analysts to get their perspective. It's Sunday the 23rd of May. You're watching 6 News also tonight.
Show me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. Show me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like.
Thousands of students march across Australia calling on the Morrison government to do more when it comes to action on climate change and to stop investing in gas and coal-fired power. We'll show you some of what we filmed on the ground in Melbourne. And never-before-seen footage of the 1937 Hindenburg disaster shared for the first time, providing fresh insight into what caused the fatal explosion which saw 35 people killed that had attempted to land in a New Jersey airfield.
Ladies and gentlemen, the smoke and its flames now, and the flame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. Oh, the humanity.
Good evening, thanks for joining us this Sunday. We are finally back on YouTube after being suspended for a week, all over something we didn't actually do. We'll explain everything a little later in the bulletin and tell you whether Google has finally responded to our questions. But first tonight, a sense of relief is set in across the Middle East, but it is tentative. On Friday, a long-awaited ceasefire came into effect following 11 days of bloody conflict. Today is the second full day of that agreement. Attention is now turned to keeping the peace between Israel and Palestine in the long term, both sides right now claiming victory and warning that if the agreement is broken, the strikes will continue. Chief Reporter Connor at 4K filed this report a short time ago.
The sound of airstrikes gave way to joy on Friday. News of the ceasefire was cause for celebration in Gaza, a city that has spent close to 2 weeks bunkering down in fear. Pouring out onto the streets, waving flags, declaring victory. Relief, at last. But no guarantees it will stay. While the fragile ceasefire has held so far, a skirmish between Israeli police and mosque attendees in East Jerusalem tested the truce just hours after it was announced. Reports say Palestinians hurled rocks and petrol bombs at Israeli police, who responded with stun grenades and tear gas. Now, the prospect of the ceasefire being broken is terrifying for many, with Israel vowing to respond with a new level of force against any expression of aggression from Hamas militants. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had also said the ceasefire was mutual and unconditional. Egypt played a crucial role in brokering the deal and have continued talks with both sides, hoping to secure long-term calm. The Hamas claiming provocation has dropped 4,000 rockets on Israel, killing 12. At least 248 have lost their lives in Gaza. The ceasefire has allowed Palestinian officials time to survey the destruction wrought by Israeli bombings, which aim to wipe out Hamas infrastructure. A COVID-19 testing lab, schools, mosques, residential units and towers, just some vital infrastructure turned to rubble in Gaza during those 11 days. That equates to tens of millions of dollars damage, according to officials. And it's created a potential humanitarian crisis in the densely populated and impoverished enclave. Now, the UN says there is an urgent need for food and support of all kinds, with 65,000 displaced. US President Joe Biden has welcomed the ceasefire, but says a two-state solution is the only answer. He's maintained the Democratic Party's support of Israel, but also pledged to help rebuild Gaza, while ensuring it doesn't enable Hamas militants to restock its weapons supply.
I believe the Palestinians and Israelis equally deserve to live safely and securely and to enjoy equal measures of freedom, prosperity, and democracy. My administration will continue our quiet and relentless diplomacy toward that end. I believe we have a genuine opportunity to make progress, and I'm committed to working for it.
In a potent reminder that this is not over yet, bodies continue to be pulled from the rubble as countries pick up the pieces of 11 deadly days.
Connor, 4K reporting there. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the future of Israel and Palestine is also another big issue, along with the prospect of peace in the Middle East. Is that even possible in the next 50 years or ever? Earlier, I spoke to educator and political activist Nora Mansour to get her thoughts on the ongoing situation.
My vision of a perfect or an ideal Palestine is a place where everyone can live together side by side, and we can all, and by everyone I mean, Palestinians and Israelis, Muslims, Jews, and Christians, everyone who is there, can live together. Once we get rid of the oppressive the oppressive structures. Meaning, as I mentioned earlier, the siege, the apartheid, the occupation, racist laws. We need to make sure that we basically decolonize the whole space, including people, actually, because it's really hard, for people when they've lived for so long with this kind of mentality of settler colonial mentality. So the people will need to go through a decolonization process as well, and then once we're there. We can all live in equality and peace together. So I definitely think that is something that is doable. I mean, it happened in Europe. European countries had very problematic relations together, but then they were able to achieve peace. If they can, so can we.
Reporting on the conflict has also been another major challenge. Just over a week ago, Israeli forces bombed and destroyed a building in Gaza, home to the Associated Press and Al Jazeera, which they claimed was being used by Hamas militants. And an open letter, which so far has almost 700 signatures, has called on the mainstream media here at home to do better when it comes to reporting on Palestine and avoid the both-siderism, which has faced a lot of criticism from people all over the world. Reporter Lincoln Holmes has the details.
The ceasefire may have come into effect, but that doesn't mean it's going to be any easier for reporters to do their job in the Middle East.
Getting some rocket fire in right now, and you can see Israel's missile defense system behind me, the Iron Dome, working right now to try to intercept those rockets.
Last week, Israel bombed the building of the Associated Press and Al Jazeera, claiming Hamas militants were using the building alongside journalists. Just days later, fighter jets bombed another media building, which reportedly killed 2 civilians. But here at home, mainstream media outlets have faced ongoing criticism over how they've been covering the situation.
This is a textbook case of what we call an asymmetric warfare. Now, an asymmetric warfare is when we have a war between a state actor versus non-state actor. And state actor here being Israel, and non-state actors the Palestinian people, including Hamas.
An open letter signed by almost 700 journalists and commentators had called on the media to do better when reporting on Palestine by avoiding both side rooms and making space for Palestine perspectives.
When I watch the Israeli news and then I watch the Australian news, it's almost identical. What does that mean? It means that the Australian media just takes whatever narrative that the Israeli mainstream media is pushing through their different media outlets and just adopts it fully.
It's now been claimed that journalists at SBS have been asked by their bosses to remove their name from the open letter in what's being described as an issue of press freedom. The MEAA has now written to SBS saying it's a principle of freedom of speech that journalists have the right to express their views about their profession and industry. We have advised SBS that any disciplinary action resulting from this expression of journalistic freedom will be strongly resisted by the MEAA, and are seeking urgent clarification from broadcast positions. Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
Right, let's now bring in political commentator and the host of the Matthew Hayne Show, Matthew Hayne. Matthew, thanks very much for joining us tonight. What are your thoughts on this recent fighting and this new ceasefire agreement?
Well, let's firstly get into it. Benjamin Netanyahu, the PM of Israel, is one of the most corrupt politicians anywhere on the planet today. You would find more legitimate leaders in the outback of Sudan right now. He is a far-right racist with so many corruption and criminal charges for bribery that the fact that anyone takes him seriously is considered ridiculous to me. And his way of winning votes after 4 elections in 2 years is just to try and kill Palestinians, because that's what gets the base fired up in his party Likud, who are, by the way, a party that, if we're in Australia, would be on the fringe of one nation. That is who we are dealing with here. We need to understand that, as Ilhan Omar put, an ethno-nationalist is the leader of Israel right now. And so when the actions of someone with that ideology, which makes Trump look like a choir boy, is going around committing war crime after war crime, which leveling the building of journalists and media outlets is a war crime under every single bit of jurisdiction the ICC has. But of course, Israel aren't in the ICC anymore, because apparently that's all the witch hunt, as he likes to put in Netanyahu. So what do we have? We have more arms deals to Israel from Biden. For what? Because Israel, of course, pay his pocket, $3.2 million in the primary and the general in pro-Israel AIPAC paid contributions to Biden. That's what you have. You have Israel being absolute impunity, and they can act on the Palestinians in any way possible, and it's a slow-motion genocide in an apartheid state. That's not me saying it. That's Desmond Tutu saying it. He helped end the apartheid in South Africa. I think he knows what he's talking about when he says the A word.
Now, you've previously said that US President Joe Biden may be more of a conservative than left-wing, or at least right of centre. What makes you say that, and how do you actually view his handling of this recent conflict?
Sure. And in terms of, you hear on Fox and Sky Australia and all those right-wing outlets, oh, Biden's a Marxist, oh, he's a communist, oh, he's a commie, oh, Trotskyism and all that. Look, if we're going to play the game of is he a communist or a conservative, he's closer to conservative, but I'd call him more of a moderate Republican, because that's what his governing history is. Let's go through it. He voted to deregulate Wall Street. Oh, that's very left-wing, isn't it? He voted for the bankruptcy bill. In fact, he was a major part of the bankruptcy bill, which means medical and student loans can now be higher and higher because he moved all of those companies to Delaware. So, that's where his Senate seat was. And the bill basically let them take more and more money at higher interest rates even. He voted for the Iraq War. He was a massive proponent of the Iraq War. He voted for permanent normal trade relations with China, a massive free trade agreement, which totally screwed workers and sent jobs overseas because it deregulated what corporations could do. He voted for the Defense of Marriage Act, which he wasn't for same-sex marriage till 2013. My God. He voted for NAFTA, again, more jobs overseas, corporate deregulation. He was a big proponent of TPP as well with Obama and Hillary Clinton. He worked with segregationists when he was an early senator, like Strom Thurmond, who had Klansmen at his rallies. He fought to stop integrated busing. He wrote the 1994 crime bill, which was too extreme even for Reagan. And he's been hawkish on every country in Latin America, the Middle East, and Asia since he's been in public life. Of course, I wouldn't call him a conservative, but definitely a moderate Republican. My God, if he was in Australia, he'd be in the Liberal Party. He's to the right of Malcolm Turnbull, and you wouldn't be calling Malcolm Turnbull on the left, would you? In terms of his handling of Israel, well, they gave him $3.2 million in the primary and the general. He's been a big supporter of Israel for decades and decades. He even said on the Senate floor in the late 70s, early 80s, if there were not an Israel, we would have to create an Israel. It's the best $3 billion investment we make each year. He is hawkish, and he supports whatever helps US aims, whether that's military in groups in Syria and Iraq that might be, a little extreme, but if they help get out the government that doesn't want to give US corporations oil, and he's been taking money from the oil industry, well, then look who he's going to support. And it's the same thing when it comes to Israel and all that. He's just given them another $735 million in arms sales, and he helped support them getting the Iron Dome in 2014 and condoned all of those practices then. Not a surprise with Biden. He's terrible.
Right now to another story closer to home. Crikey has reported that the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources will run a PR campaign through an online news channel called Ticker News, a channel I've been on a number of times now. Founder Aaron Young says that the deal involves a program called Ticker Business, which he claims is not related to news. But should news channels really be doing things like PR for federal bureaucrats if they truly want to stay fair and balanced?
Well, I think you've kind of got to the heart of it there, but let's be honest here. All the main media outlets are basically PR firms for the politicians anyway. I mean, take a look at the fact that Murdoch Print, which completely dominates the papers and the commentary, the online opinion, the biggest YouTube channel in the country on news and all the rest of it. I mean, if you go to Queensland, what is it? Is it 6 out of the 7 papers are Murdoch? And you've got the same thing. They're pushing their own agenda. It's liberal, liberal, liberal all the way. As Kevin Rudd says, is it 19 out of the last 19 they've backed him? And he's right. And then you've got other papers that are not necessarily super pro-Labor, but they'll push back against the Liberals and give a more nuanced centre to maybe centre-left view of things with their commentators. The Age was like that, and they're now owned by Nine. And the same keeps going. It's just everyone's doing their own PR for their own self-gain, and it's all to keep a hold of those that buy their advertising in the end. You know, if car sales, who usually buy about 30 pages in the Herald Sun each day, they could have the biggest corruption scandal you've ever heard. And I guarantee you for 100% of my money, which isn't very much, you would not see it in the Herald Sun the next day. And it's the same with all this. All of these companies are just doing their own, for their own, what am I trying to say? Hold on, give me a sec. All of these companies are just in it for themselves. They're all in for their own profits in the end. And if you can make people either angry, which you see more online, or picking a team and things like that, people are going to buy your papers. So PR is just another way for political parties to get out the message. They can stay in power. The papers keep making their money. They run out the back door, and it doesn't really matter about honesty, journalism, integrity. That's all dead. Sorry to be blunt about it.
Alright, and just finally tonight, obviously we're now back on YouTube after a 1-week suspension. Just quickly let me know, and obviously you're on YouTube quite a fair bit with your podcast, should appealing a video takedown actually lead to a suspension?
Well, let me take that further. I don't think you should get suspended on the platform unless you're, I don't know, unless it's for maybe direct threat of violence, showing a crime, maybe if it's you're in court doing defamation and you're a commentator, you can't go out and say something during a case. And unless you're showing underage material or something that is against the terms of services in that nature, nothing should get taken down, let alone having your channel taken down for a week for appealing on something that wasn't even against terms and services to begin with. That is totally ridiculous. Your suspension on YouTube this past week has made absolutely no sense. Would make about as much sense as Hitler entering a synagogue for pleasure. That's not a great joke, but there we go. That's just the true reality of it. And this goes back to the freedom of speech argument. Journalists should be given every bit of freedom of speech they can possibly get. And now let's talk about the one journalist right now, or amongst many, sitting in prison right now in Belmarsh is Julian Assange. And this is what happens. It goes down the road. You can be taken off YouTube. You can be taken off Twitter. And all of a sudden, you're like Julian Assange and you're sitting in prison for reporting facts, for saying these are war crimes and exposing it. And it's the same thing that goes with you, on a lesser scale, of course. But that's what happens when free speech is taken down by these big companies regarding journalism. It shouldn't happen. It's that simple.
Right, we'll leave it there. Matthew Hayne, host of The Matthew Hayne Show. Thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Leo. Pleasure to be on.
Alright, to other news tonight, and thousands have marched across Australia to protest about inaction on climate change. Organisers of the school strike for climate are demanding that the Morrison government stop investing in gas and coal-fired power and commit more money to renewable energies. But some critics are concerned about this creating climate anxiety, a term used to relate to people, especially children, who are experiencing anxiety about the threat of environmental disaster. Here's some of what we filmed on the ground in Melbourne.
When your very future is under attack, what should you do? Stand up! Fight back! What should you do? Stand up! Fight back!
Fossil fuels, go away! Fossil fuels, go away! Don't dig it! Leave it in the ground, start to get with it! Don't dig it! Leave it in the ground, start to get with it!
Climate change is a very big thing. And we need to stop it like.
Hate climate action! Yeah!
Scarborough's a wanker, man.
Show me what democracy looks like! This is what democracy looks like! Show me what democracy looks like! This is what democracy looks like! Show me what...
And the protests were not just in Melbourne. We saw marches in every capital city as well as in a number of regional areas. Students want the federal government to withdraw support and subsidies for gas projects and instead fund renewable energy initiatives and solutions for protecting the environment that are actually backed by First Nations people. The nationwide strike action comes just days after the government confirmed it would spend up to $600 million to build a new gas power plant in the New South Wales Hunter Valley, while on the same day the International Energy Agency called on for an end to new coal mines, oil and gas wells. An Indigenous artist says she's heartbroken after accusing Port Adelaide of stealing her design for the team's 2021 Indigenous Round Guernsey. South Australian woman Ellie Campbell has claimed that the club's design was her exact painting that she had shared online as early as May 2019, attaching this image on Instagram next to an image of the jumper design. In a statement, Port Adelaide said they are aware of allegations that surfaced on social media regarding the design of its Indigenous Guernsey and have now launched a full-on investigation. The club also faced a similar controversy in 2019 when a separate designer claimed that the power ripped off his logo that he designed all the way back in 2015. Overseas now, scientists say the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention's new mask guidelines for Americans could actually increase the risk of spreading COVID-19 at work and in public. Last week, vaccinated Americans were told by the CDC that they no longer need to wear a mask indoors or outdoors in most settings, in part because research shows that the vaccines provide a very high level of protection against getting sick from the virus. But now there's concern that the virus could still spread, especially if people continue to avoid the jab. US correspondent Jackson Gosnell has the latest.
Well, Leo, we're monitoring many stories here in the United States, but the most crucial right now is about wearing masks. Many governors have rescinded their mask mandates after the CDC's guidance suggesting fully vaccinated Americans no longer have to wear a mask in most places. Now, some of the exceptions to that are airports as well as healthcare facilities and public transit. Aside from that, the CDC says if you're fully vaccinated, you don't need to wear a mask. So many governors are taking back their restrictions, and many cities are doing that as well. However, some states and some towns throughout the country have decided to keep those mandates in place because they don't see enough people getting vaccinated or whatever the case may be. But this is most likely going to be done in an honor system in most cases, meaning that they won't be required to show proof of vaccination, but rather just trusted simply, for actually having the vaccine done. So this has stirred up a lot of controversy here because some of the states that continue to have mask mandates, they are, upsetting people in many cases who want to take their masks off. And then you have the reverse. Here where I'm at in South Carolina, Governor Henry McMaster issued an executive order allowing parents to opt their students out of wearing a mask and rescinding mask mandates throughout the state. That was, in large part, a success for many parents. However, there is an opposing side who say that this is ridiculous. They are upset by it. They think that it puts them in more serious danger, and they want the governor to, have the mask mandate back in place. So no matter the situation, if you're a Democrat, Republican, whatever the case may be, you're never going to please anybody, but it's particularly interesting to see how the different states respond to the CDC's guidance for vaccinated Americans. I will continue to follow the latest on mask wearing from here in the United States and report back soon. I'm reporting in the U.S. I'm Jackson Gosnell. Back to you.
Dozens of big cats have been seized from an Oklahoma park belonging to Jeff and Lauren Lowe's, the star couple of Netflix's hit show Tiger King. Officials from the U.S. Justice Department announced that 7 lions, 46 tigers, 15 lion-tiger hybrids, and 1 jaguar were all recovered. That's a total of 68, after inspecting the zoo 3 times since December last year. The Lowe's are both accused of violating U.S. laws on endangered species and animal welfare and have been cited for failing to provide the animals with adequate or timely veterinary care, appropriate nutrition and shelter that protects them from inclement weather and is of sufficient size to allow them to engage in normal behaviour. What am I saying tonight? Meanwhile, never-before-seen footage of the 1937 Hindenburg disaster has been shared for the first time by the nephew of the photographer who took the video. Documentarians believe that it may provide fresh insight into what caused the fatal explosion, which saw 35 people killed as it attempted to land in a New Jersey airfield. Amateur photographer Harold Shinek was on the ground with a wind-up movie camera, and unlike the now famous newsreel footage, this video shows more of the accident from an earlier stage. The Hindenburg air disaster is one of the most famous in history, though it has never actually been confirmed what caused the airship to catch fire. California's Department of Education is working on a new framework that actually discourages gifted students from enrolling in accelerated classes, all in the name of equity. The department says that they're worried that too many students are sorted into different maths tracks based on their natural abilities, which leads some to take calculus by their senior year of high school, while others don't make it past basic algebra. The solution, according to this document, is to prohibit any sorting until high school. Another part of the framework also connects maths to things like racism, reportedly saying that teachers can, quote, support discussions that centre mathematical reasoning rather than issues of status and bias by intentionally defining what it means to do and learn mathematics together in ways that include and highlight the languages, identities and practices of historically marginalised communities. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comment section below by using hashtag 6NewsAU. And now here's Ivan and Sarah with a look at what's coming up tonight on WAMN News.
Thanks, Leo. Coming up on WAMN News, the Australians too. An Australian Indian top doctor accuses the federal government of having no plans to help Aussies stranded in India. An exclusive interview.
Australian students skip school to strike over inaction on climate change. And on Western Perspective, what does the Pindan construction collapse mean for the Fremantle City Centre project? Plus, Dr. Andrew Miller's comment. Join us tonight after 5:30 West Coast time on the WAMN News Facebook page and YouTube channel.
Right, thanks to both Ivan and Sarah there. A 12-week-old kitten who had part of both back legs cut off has been given a new lease on life in New Zealand. The Blair family, who live in rural Canterbury, found the frightened kitten on their property in late April, which the family believes was dumped on their property, though it is possible the injuries could have happened accidentally. The kitten had to spend a week eating special food before he was allowed to have surgery, which allowed skin to be pulled over his leg stumps. The Blair family have since taken in the feline, who they have named Pascoe after New Zealand Paralympian Sophie Pascoe. Now tomorrow's forecast right across the country. Brisbane partly cloudy, top of 22, 19 and heavy rain in Sydney, 17 degrees in the nation's capital, 18 and heavy clouds in Melbourne, 17 in Hobart, 24 in Adelaide, 28 in Alice Springs, 15 in Perth, a chance of some light rain, and in Darwin a warm top of 33. And finally tonight, as we mentioned at the start of the bulletin, as you can obviously see, we are now back on YouTube. Now, if you're unaware, basically on Saturday night, not last night, but a week ago, we were informed that we had been suspended for a week after appealing a video takedown. Now, that video, we don't want to go into too much detail of, but it was basically of a school shooting which killed 9 people, and it showed students jumping out of the window to escape the gunfire. Now, those students were clearly visible in getting up. The footage was blurry. We did not have ads on the video. We had an age restriction on the video, and we put a warning by ourselves on that video. Now, when we appealed the initial takedown, we were later informed that we had gotten that suspension. Now, we think that's unfair. Why should we be suspended just for appealing the video? As we were speaking to Matthew Hayne about a little earlier. Now, we would love to know your thoughts on this. Is this censorship? And if it's not, aren't these rules still fair? Should an appeal justify a takedown? Now, we did email Google about this directly at their press account. We have so far not gotten a reply. That is 6 News for this Sunday evening. Start today with the latest headlines by heading to our website 6newsau.com and by following us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok and LinkedIn. Just search 6 News 8 to find us. I'm Leonardo Puglisi. Thanks for your company. Good night.